Do we have a faith we can live and die for? In the year 168 BC, the unthinkable happened. Antiochus, the Greek king, who held power over Judea, destroyed much of Jerusalem, slaughtered thousands of Jews, and desecrated the temple by sacrificing a pig on the altar. Antiochus saw himself as the manifestation of Zeus on the earth and was determined to Hellenize the Jews by outlawing Mosaic law and the worship of Yahweh, replacing it with the proud Greek culture that at this point had covered the known earth. Though far more sophisticated than the paganism of the Canaanites in Israel's past, it was, by and large, the same old thing. Zeus was essentially Baal, and the pantheon consisted of the same deities, only with change of names. This is the context of the amazing story of the 7 brothers and their mother of this week's reading. Already, for well over 100 years, the Greek influence in Palestine made deep inroads in Jewish culture, even to the point that many religious leaders were thoroughly Hellenized. They fell away from the belief of Yahweh as the transcendent God above all, who entered into relationship with them by covenant, and who revealed to them his will as absolute truth. Paganism is essentially a worldview where transcendence is not real, but immanence, that is, creation and its territorial spirits and earth deities. It was an ancient form of relativism. Wherever one goes, one must pay homage to the local gods. A transcendent God assumes absolute and universal truth. Multiple gods of paganism incorporates multiple beliefs, intellectual and moral relativism. In our story, we find a mother with her 7 sons before Antiochus, who is trying to force them to eat swine's flesh. This act would be a denial of their belief in their transcendent God and his law. We see this in this woman and her sons, an amazing fearlessness, their unwavering trust in the God of heaven and earth, and willingness to die for their faith. In fact, their faith is as transcendent and absolute as Yahweh himself. As the horrible event unfolds, we are left with the impression that this woman, who is willing to watch all her sons cruelly tortured to death before her one by one, oldest to the youngest, is more vital, more exalted, and more alive than she ever was in her whole life. She begs her sons to hold firm, which they are more than willing to do. They are obsessed with their transcendent God and therefore become transcendent themselves. In our gospel today, we find the Sadducees testing Jesus by asking him a question about the resurrection which they denied. We do not know a whole lot about the Sadducees, but they were a group of highly influential religious elite that maintained the temple and the status quo. They looked only to the first 5 books of the Bible, called the Pentateuch, as their authority, rejected the immortality of the soul, life after death, and therefore rewards and punishment after death. Though they believed in Yahweh, the transcendent God of their fathers, their rejection of the immortality of the soul and the resurrection disconnects them from transcendence. Transcendence no longer is real to them, but rather this life and their position in it. Who they are as persons and what they do morally has no consequence that transcends their mortal lives. When thus dislodged from transcendence, everything in the end becomes relative, like the pagan worldview. We do not see here the vital experience of God and elevation of soul that the woman with her 7 sons had. Is this a faith we can live and die for? Jesus counters such thinking by redirecting them to the simple language of Scripture that essentially connects humanity to transcendence. Yahweh revealed himself as the God of their fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and therefore the God of the living and not the dead. When vitally related through faith in God who transcends all things, we naturally share and partake of that transcendence. This is a faith by which we can live and die for. What has this story of the woman with the 7 sons and Jesus' confrontation with the Sadducees have to do with us? Well, our culture has rejected the transcendent God of Scripture and has therefore set itself adrift in the sea of relativity. For Israel, it was Hellenization. For us, it is secularization. There is no absolute truth. In fact, the only absolute truth is that there are no absolutes, which, of course, is the glaring contradiction of the time. Behind this is the belief that if one is willing to die for one's absolutes, one will kill for absolutes, and the religious wars of the past and present are cited as proof of this. The woman with the 7 sons is disdained as a misguided and hopeless fanatic. Conveniently, it is forgotten that the ideology of secular humanism has brought about more genocide in the past 100 years than all the killings of the past. Many in the church today are easily buffaloed by our secular culture's insistence that everything is relative. We hear often that there are many truths. One person has his truth, another has her truth. We therefore become arbitrators of truth ourselves. With this comes a watered-down understanding of transcendence and absolutes. We are left with a tepid and benign existence where we have nothing really worth living for or dying for. Again, we come back to the woman with her 7 sons as she begs them to remain true to God rather than be swept away by the culture. The world asks with Pilate, who is seated upon centuries of failed Greco-Roman philosophical inquiry, what is truth? Pilate believed that he had stumped Jesus with this question, just as this question had stumped him and his whole culture. Jesus stands before him as the truth incarnate, absolute transcendence in bodily form. He not only spoke the truth, but he is the truth. Truth is ultimately a person. Pilate, and the world long abandoned the quest for truth. And when truth was before them, they crucified the truth. The zeal of the woman with the 7 sons is the same zeal that we see in the martyrs of the church. It is a zeal sparked by Jesus' zeal for humanity and willingness to lay down his life for it. They all have this in common. They burn with a fire that is lit from heaven above, and therefore possessed a faith they could live and die for. May this be true for all of us.